guys, welcome back to the home and Homestead. My name is Rebecca, and today on the Homestead we'll be pressure canning beef bone broth or beef stock. You can watch step 1 of the process of the recipe of how we made this beef bone broth or beef stock in this Hearty Soups and Rustic breads, where together we made the beef bone broth and beef stock and cooked it for over 24 hours in my Nesco roaster oven. So now the beef bone broth has been cooling in the Nesco roaster, and what I'm going to do is skim off the vegetables and remove the beef bones and meat. I'll try to save the meat for doing other recipes with that meat so as not to waste it. I'll just use this hand strainer here to remove the large pieces of vegetable off of the top here. This smells absolutely wonderful. I can't wait to use this to make soups or gravies and things like that. It's a great way to use just some vegetable scraps, and if you get a beef from a farmer, you can take the soup bones when they process your beef and use them for a project such as this. There's so much flavor in this. So this beef will be really tasty as well. Nice big piece of meat here. So if you watched part 1 of this process, which is the recipe for this beef bone broth or beef stock, I cooked this at 250 degrees for over 24 hours. It has a really nice rich brown color to the broth, and it smells wonderful. So I have a nice amount of beef here that I'll use for probably roast sandwiches and things like that. Let me get another bowl and I'll do another straining of this. There's a fair bit of liquid on the bottom of this bowl, so I want to strain this off one more time to try to get as much liquid as I can out of there. All right, so we have our vegetables strained away. We had that much more broth in here. We just pour this into my fat separator pitcher here. Kind of show you how this works. So as this sits and cools, eventually the fat will rise to the top. Then I'll just press this little green button here and it'll open a hole on the bottom and it'll pour down into whatever vessel we're using to can or cook in. It also has this little strainer on the top that catches the larger food particles. So let this cool a little bit, and I'll get my canning jar set up because we are going to be pressure canning this beef bone broth today. Alright, so there really isn't that much fat in this beef bone broth. A little bit on top, as you can see, it's separating. You could clear that off. Kind of skim it off the top. Also, with this fat separator here, this has been cooling. Close up here. So you can see just that real thin layer on top is the fat that's separated off. So now all I have to do is hold this over a jar and press that little green button. And the broth that's separated away from the fat is at the bottom of this little pitcher, or a little measuring cup basically. Now all that's left is that little bit of fat that's separated away. So now what I'm going to do is get this bone broth. I'll put this into my fat separator. That'll help kind of strain away any big particles of food. And as it sits, that fat will separate away. So we'll just let that sit for a bit, and I'll get these jars filled. I have my pressure canner set up and warming the water within it so that it'll be ready for these warm jars of beef bone broth. So the setup I have here is I have my canning funnel, then I have a a mesh strainer. Then I have my fat separator, which has a larger strainer on top. And then I'm just filling it to a 1-inch headspace, which is just about to the bottom of the threads of these wide mouth quart jars. And I'm not wasting that little bit of broth with the fat that's separated. I'm putting that into my bowl where I have the meat that I pulled away from the soup bones. To get this broth out of the cooking reservoir. And after the broth has set for a while, the fat separates, and I just pour into the jar. Alright, so let me finish filling the rest of these jars, and then we'll come back for the next step of the process. Alright, so I have 8 wide mouth quart jars filled with the beef bone broth or beef stock. So now we're going to wipe the rims and the side threads with a wet paper towel. I just wet this with some water. This will just help ensure a nice seal on our jars, like that. Now we'll just put the lid, followed by the ring, just finger tight. And the ring just helps hold the lid in place while it's being processed. Once the jars have a chance to cool for 12 to 24 hours, then this ring can be removed once you ensure that the seal was made nicely. And then you can put these jars on your pantry shelf. They do best in a cooler storage, so 50 to 70 degrees is the optimal temperature. All right, let's get these into the pressure canner. Okay, so we're over at the pressure canner. So this is the Miro 22 quart pressure canner. It's a cooktop version. I have a separate cooktop here. I have a glass cooktop. Otherwise, I just feel more comfortable doing my canning on a separate burner such as this. Inside of this canner, I have the recommended amount of water, which is 2 quarts of water with a jar rack on the bottom. So the jars can go right onto that jar rack. So this pressure canner holds 7 wide mouth quart jars. I have 8, so I held back 2, and I'll do a second batch of processing once this is completed. So now that the pressure canner is filled with the jars, we will just place the lid on here. So there's a little arrow here and on the black handle. You line up the little arrows, kind of depress it a little bit, and then slide the black handles so they line up. Now it's locked in place. So now what we're going to do is, on a medium-high heat, we'll let this pressure canner come up to pressure. Once that happens, steam will start coming out of this little spout here. Once that steam comes out consistently, I'll time it for 10 minutes, and then I'll put the 10 psi weight onto this canner. Once the 10 psi weight is put on and it reaches at 10 psi, this will pop up. This is a little pressure valve, much like you'll see in an Instant Pot and other such pressure cookers. Now the processing time for these quart jars for the beef bone broth is 25 minutes. That time does not start until after this weight is put on and this little top comes up. So based on your altitude, your PSI for pressure canning may be different. What I mean by that, here's the altitude chart from the Ball Blue Book and other such canning cookbooks. Your manual that came with your canner may have something as well. It has a boiling water method on the top, but on the bottom it has the pressure method. So it shows an altitude in feet, the far left column. Wherever you live, whatever your altitude is, it'll tell you which weighted gauge, if you have a style such as this Miro, or a dial gauge like the Presto stovetop pressure canner variety, and it'll tell you what pressure you should be canning your particular item at. So just something to be mindful whenever you're canning, whether it be water bath canning or pressure canning. So for us, it is 10 psi for 25 minutes. So we'll let the pressure build and we'll watch for the steam to come out consistently from that stem there. Alright guys, so a steady stream has been coming through this stem here. I don't know if you can see it very well on camera, but the little drops of water come off of it as well. And that's been doing that for 10 minutes. So now I'm going to place the 10 psi weight on here. There we go. We'll watch for this little button to pop up. Once that happens, we know that it's at 10 psi and it's processing these jars at the proper pressure. There we go. The little tab rose up, so it's processing the jars. I will set the timer for 25 minutes and we'll let these jars process. It took about 5 minutes for this tab to come up and this pressure canner to come up to pressure, just so you're aware. And this is a weighted style pressure canner. So what that means is based on the weight of the device you put up here, that's the PSI pressure that you are setting. And if anything in excess of that happens, this top will spin around and excess steam will come out of the holes, and that's how it keeps itself at the proper PSI. If you have a gauge style which has a numbered gauge on top, that you have to keep a closer eye on and turn the temperature down or up based on whatever number value that you are reading throughout the process of pressure canning. Alright, so the processing time has finished. So what we'll do is turn the burner off. We'll allow the pressure to come down in the pressure canner. Once this little red tab falls flat with this handle, then we will know that the pressure has decreased enough that we can remove the weight and open the lid. So we'll let this pressure come down. Alright, so the pressure has been released and this little red tab has dropped. When I touch the weight, I don't see any steam spurting out the side, so I can safely remove this weight. Now we can remove the lid. You just twist it, little side turn, and lift it off, turning it away from you. We'll just place that off to the side. Now we'll just let these jars sit in the canner for about 5 minutes, and then we'll transfer them over to the cooling and sealing area. I still have 2 more jars of beef bone broth to process, so I'll do those once I get these jars out. So we'll just let these sit for 5 minutes and then I'll show you a little closer look at the final product. Alright guys, so we have 6 of the 8 jars of beef bone broth all pressure canned. I have the last 2 in the pressure canner right now processing. In the meantime, let's take a closer look at the beef bone broth or beef stock that we prepared together. It really has a nice, beautiful dark brown color to it, and I tasted it and it's just lightly salted flavoring with lots of other wonderful flavors of the carrots and the onions, celery, garlic, and the black pepper. It really is a nice flavorful beef broth, and I'm looking forward to using this in soups as well as other recipes. This bone broth works very well also if you want to make a little more of a flavorful rice. If you make rice in a rice cooker or your Instant Pot, a little bit of beef broth or chicken broth or vegetable broth really adds a little something to the rice and the dish that you're making. Well, I hope you enjoyed our time together in the kitchen while we pressure canned this beef bone broth or beef stock. If you want to see the recipe and how we made the beef bone broth, you can check out step 1 of this process in the Hearty Soups and Rustic breads for beef bone broth video. You can also check out other videos I have on pressure canning where I do various types of beans using either the stovetop pressure canners such as we use today together, as well as the Presto Digital Pressure Canner, which is an electric pressure canner. I hope you're having a wonderful day today and have a chance to make some homemade stock yourself and can that so that it'll stay good on your pantry shelf throughout the year. I will leave this on the cooling and sealing area for 12 to 24 hours, and then I will make sure that all the jars sealed. If any of the jars did not seal, you can simply place them in the refrigerator and use them within a week, or you can put that broth into a freezer-safe container, and that can stay in the freezer for about 3 to 6 months. If you're new to the channel, I would appreciate you subscribing. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. See you next time. Take care.